Welcome to episode 1 of The Art of Porn Recovery. I'm your host, Matt Finch. This is my sidekick, Papaya the bird. Over on the couch is Harper the dog. And this show is made with the goal of helping you to more easily and quickly end porn addiction, cravings, withdrawal, and relapse. But first, you should know at least a brief background about me and my qualifications, skills, certifications, and why I started this podcast. To make a long story short, I was afflicted with several addictions during the span of my teenage years, 20s and early 30s, including cannabis addiction, alcohol addiction, benzodiazepine addiction, opioid addiction, and even behavior addictions such as pornography, sex addiction, and codependency with another human being. Then at the age of 32, I hit rock bottom, and I hit rock bottom really, really hard. And my family helped me to end my addictions and get healthy in my brain, body, mind, emotions, relationships, and spirit. And it's been over 13 years since that rock bottom moment. And I've been a certified addiction counselor working in outpatient treatment. Then, for the past decade, I've been a private practice recovery coach after becoming trained and certified as a strategic intervention coach by Tony Robbins and Chloe Madanes. Then assisting one-on-one opioid dependent clients to detox, heal, and recover for many years. And then I became the head of Fit Recovery Coaching, an online alcohol recovery rehab program that, like me, also used a biopsychosocial spiritual model for holistically viewing and treating addiction. I've loved working with Fit Recovery and helping one-on-one and group coaching clients to stop drinking alcohol and recover. And during the past few years, unfortunately, I've noticed an alarming, disturbing negative trend, and I had a strong intuition years ago that I would eventually be needed to help the millions of people, mostly men or even young men and also women, to share my meta modeling systems, strategies, and tactics for transcending addictions to drugs or behaviors like porn. Recently, a new one on one client I began working with has inspired me to pull the trigger and launch the art of porn recovery. And thus, here we are with episode 1 and many more to come. All right, now that you have a brief background, it's time to learn why I view porn addiction as an exhausted resource. I learned about this concept from a book on neurolinguistic programming, NLP, for counselors to better help their clients with alcohol problems or other addictions. I was 32 years old and a student at Mueller College, which was a holistic trade school where I got trained and certified as an addiction counselor. During a 6-week module titled Complementary and Integrative Modalities for Treating Addiction, I chose the topic of NLP, and I was required to do a 60 to 90 minute live presentation of my topic in front of my teachers and other classmates. Thus, I not only read the NLP for Addiction Counseling book, I also studied it, took notes, reread it, and read other NLP books too. I got a perfect score on my 90-minute presentation and a standing ovation from everyone, teachers included. The best concept I learned from this project, I'm now going to teach to you, my new friend, because the fact is, pornography can start off as a resource for a person. A resource is defined as a source of supply or support. If a person consumes porn content for the first time and is repelled by it, porn doesn't become a resource for this individual. Instead, it's something that is more akin to an aversion or a moot behavior, M-O-O-T, moot. However, if a person consumes pornography and masturbates to it for the very first time and they have an enjoyable experience, then porn just became a subjective resource for them. The dopamine spike from consuming porn and masturbating to it is very high, and orgasm feels so good, right? This behavior can be a subjective resource for lowering stress, anxiety, insomnia, or loneliness. Plus, it can increase dopamine levels high and fast, and much more, depending on the unique person and their individual biochemistry or their biochemical individuality, their lifestyle, among other variables. For example, when I was a teenager and still a virgin, I would masturbate to pornography magazines. I think magazines like Hustler and maybe one was called Skank. Really disgusting, hard porn magazines back in the mid 1990s and late 1990s. I would masturbate to these magazines in my bathroom or bedroom with the door locked to release all the built up tension from increasing levels of libido or sex drive as puberty commenced on my growing brain and body. Since I was still a virgin and also too shy, insecure, and introverted to ask a girl out on a date, masturbating to pornography became a subjective resource for giving my life a net boost overall. I was getting a lot of benefits and pleasure from the behavior and almost no pain and negative consequences. If I had to evaluate the pleasure and benefits versus the pain and negative consequences of my masturbating to pornography behavior in my teenage years, I would say a 10 out of 10 level of pleasure and benefits for it, and only a 1 out of 10 level of pain and negative consequences. This is a primary fundamental I'm about to elaborate on for you. Despite humans being eternal spirits using a biological material body and supercomputer brain with a 3D mind to incarnate in this physical reality, everything we do or don't do is based on our innate drive to seek out and move towards pleasure and avoid pain. Thus, since I associated a 10 out of 10 pleasure and benefits and only a 1 out of 10 pain and negative consequences to masturbating to porn, at least subjectively in my own psyche and my own mind, I viewed porn as an epic, capital E, capital P, capital I, capital C, an epic resource for giving my overall life a net subjective increase to quality of life. Now that you see how porn can and often does start out as a resource for making one's life better, let's move on to how this subjective and multidimensional resource can become exhausted. Depending on the effects porn has on a person, the amount of stress in their life, the accessibility of porn, and other factors, this resource can eventually start to deplete, sometimes quickly and other times slowly. When the negative consequences from porn outweigh the positive benefits, I consider porn an exhausted resource, because if the pain and negative consequences outweigh the pleasure and positive benefits, then mathematically speaking, porn use is creating a net deficit to your quality of life. And the brain is always trying to do these mathematic quantifications, at least unconsciously, keeping us moving away from pain and negative consequences and moving toward pleasure and positive benefits. It's called the pain-pleasure principle. For some people, it only takes a few months or less for porn to go from a resource to an exhausted resource. For other people, it can take years or a decade or longer before it becomes an exhausted resource. Some people use porn as a resource for their whole lives, and they can use porn here and there, and it never leads to significant negative consequences, let alone addiction. Here's my formula for knowing whether or not porn has become an exhausted resource for you. You get more negative consequences with this caveat. You may still be getting benefits from porn, but if you're getting a lot of negative consequences that override the benefits, such as you're spending too much money or time, or it's causing pain in your relationships, etc., these different negative consequences can begin to outweigh at first and then progressively heavily outweigh the positive benefits. When this happens in NLP, we call it an exhausted resource. It's also an exhausted resource if you haven't received the benefits in weeks, months, or even years, and you're basically just using porn to prevent the acute withdrawal symptoms, the post-acute withdrawal symptoms, like depression, fatigue, insomnia, or even anhedonia, which is pleasure deafness, literally the inability to feel any pleasure whatsoever. The porn withdrawal symptoms can be just as bad, if not worse, than alcohol or other drug addictions. I recently watched a video of the famous actor Dennis Quaid sharing about his past addiction to cocaine that began in the 70s and ended in the 1980s when he went to long-term rehab. Quaid said that addiction is 3 stages. First, it's fun, then it's fun with problems, and then it's a problem. To put this through the NLP filter, first, porn is a lot of pleasure and positive benefits, period. Next, the pain and negative consequences begin to weigh the same amount as the pleasure and benefits. Finally, the pain and negative consequences outweigh the pleasure and benefits. And now the math confirms that porn is resulting in a net deficit of your overall quality of life. Or as Quaid said, now it's a problem. The paths that can get a person to this destination are varied and numerous, but the continuum is always the same, going from a resource to an exhausted resource. Once this resource is exhausted, the longer a person continues using porn, typically the more negative consequences, pain, suffering, and difficulties they'll experience in their life. This is a life of pain, which ranges from mild to moderate to severe depending on the situation and person, but it's always pain. I started the art of porn recovery because I can no longer stand by and do nothing when I see and hear about so many people, especially men and young men, but also women, who are experiencing porn use disorder and the associated pain, suffering, and negative consequences to their physical, mental, emotional, social, financial, professional, and spiritual health, while simultaneously not even feeling much from porn anymore and really just using it to prevent the withdrawal symptoms from coming on. Porn is not considered an addiction, and thus there has not been many resources for them to quit. And out of the small number of resources, there isn't much that is too effective, leaving people with porn use disorder to either try to quit on their own or use the limited in quantity and efficacy resources for recovering from porn. Mark my word, porn use disorder is a valid addiction that is nearly identical to substance addictions. Why? Allow me to explain. Dr. Gabor Mate, a world-famous addiction professional and expert in Canada, came up with a new working definition in his new book, The Myth of Normal: Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture, one of the best books I've ever read. Dr. Mate says, quote, "Addiction is a complex psychological, emotional, physiological, neurobiological, social, and spiritual process. It manifests through any behavior in which a person finds temporary relief or pleasure, and therefore craves, but that in the long term causes them or other negative consequences, and yet the person refuses or is unable to give it up. Accordingly, the three hallmarks of addiction are short-term relief and pleasure, and therefore craving, long-term suffering for oneself or others, and an inability to stop." The quote continues, "Two things to note right away. First, my definition omits disease, which is not to say that it must exclude it. Most illnesses are best understood as complex processes manifesting a person's entire life, rather than discrete things in themselves. In the end, as with many conditions, calling addiction a disease may capture relevant aspects of it without coming close to explaining the phenomenon, let alone granting us a workable path to healing it at its source. Second, this definition is not restricted to drugs. The same drive that often devotes itself to substances can activate any number of behaviors, from compulsive sexual roving to pornography, from inveterate shopping to the internet, both of which habits I know well, from gaming to gambling, from any sort of binge eating or drinking to purging, work to extreme sports, from relentless exercising to compulsive relationship seeking, from psychedelics to meditation. The issue is never the external target, but one's internal relationship to it." End quote. To conclude this episode 1 of The Art of Porn Recovery, let's review the key concepts and give you a free PDF download of my worksheet I created for you called "Is Porn an Exhausted Resource for You?" Key concept number 1. Porn can start off as a resource that gives you pleasure and positive benefits. 2. Over time and with continued porn use or porn consumption, this resource can become exhausted. This happens once the pain and negative consequences outweigh the pleasure and positive benefits, leading to a net deficit to your quality of life. 3. Despite it being an exhausted resource for many people, they still cannot quit. Why? Because quitting porn addiction, much like quitting substance addictions, can cause numerous significant withdrawal symptoms that can cause physical and psychological debilitations. And this is due to the dopamine rebound effect and other numerous chronic brain physiology dysfunctions that porn addiction caused or exacerbated. A great first step in quitting porn for good is to use my worksheet to measure your current pain pleasure polarized neuroassociations regarding porn use. The pinned comment and the description box of this video have your free worksheet on the exhausted resource formula. Next, please hit the like button for me and then subscribe and turn on your post notifications because you're going to go crazy with excitement and joy and inner peace when you tune into episode 2 of The Art of Porn Recovery. And with that being said, thank you for joining me, and I'll be back really soon. Take good care of yourself, and I'll see you on episode 2 of The Art of Porn Recovery. Take care.